We have a quick spiel from Dan Moser, who is from Avalara.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. I want to thank everyone for the invite and the opportunity to speak about obviously the most riveting topic of 2020, sales tax compliance, of course, everyone's favorite. And I am Dana Moser. I am a strategic alliance manager in the accounting channel at Avalara. So I'm here today just to briefly go over our suite of products and services, and of course, talk about how the sales tax landscape is changing and how we come into play with that. So yeah, briefly, this is the agenda for the day. We have our Avalara Overview. We'll talk about the solutions, and then we'll leave some time for some question and answers. All right, so just for some background data points about Avalara, we were founded about 16 years ago, which in the sales tax world, it feels like a lifetime by now, and became publicly traded back in June of 2018. So we currently have about 30,000 active customers, which, all those customers together, they put together 17.6 billion tax calls and had 2 million returns that they need to process just last year. So before 2018, I don't know if everyone's familiar with the Supreme Court ruling, South Dakota versus Wayfair, but that's really what exploded the sales tax world and Avalara's business. It's a Supreme Court ruling where the state of South Dakota went head-to-head against the big giant Wayfair, the online furnishing company, and the Supreme Court ruled in favor of South Dakota, which changed the whole landscape. Before that, you needed to have a physical presence in a state in order to register and be obligated to collect and remit sales tax in those states. Well, that changed completely when the Supreme Court ruled in favor of South Dakota. They created this whole new world that's a term called economic nexus, in which there are different thresholds that you need to meet. If you're doing a certain amount of business in a state, then you are required to register in that state and start collecting or remitting sales tax. And so if you want to go to the next slide, we'll dive into how we work and come into play with this. All right, so I think you may click one more so we can get the rest of it, so we can show the full thing. And one more click. Perfect, there we go. So this is Avalara's sales tax suite. These are our three core products: AvaTax, Returns, and Cert Capture. So essentially, AvaTax is our sales tax calculation engine. It is the brain behind the whole operation. All that data that you guys all the clients are using, storing within their Sage environments, we're going to make that integration into that environment and pretty much just pull the addresses and information that's going on every invoice that you guys are sending out, sending that to the AvaTax tax engine, doing a whole bunch of computations using address validation, making sure that the product taxability is correct, and spitting back its sales tax calculation back to the invoice, storing all that data within the AvaTax console, transferring it over, storing it, making sure it's all secure, transferring it over to the returns console so we can properly fill out those returns and remit them to the appropriate jurisdictions. The other piece to that is the exemption certificate management concept. If you are an exempt reseller, if you have clients that shouldn't be collecting sales tax or you should be charging sales tax to, I'll get into it a little bit later, but this is the solution that triggers that exemption certificate so that we're not automatically charging sales tax. So if you go to the next one, we can show how AvaTax works. We'll show the circle of life with the sales tax realm. So just to point out some little tidbits of how AvaTax works, what everyone really thinks about sales tax is just tax determination. And the first thing that comes to mind is just, oh yeah, we just need to know the sales tax rates. It's a lot more complicated than that, of course. Nothing's that easy. Nothing's that cut and dry when it comes to tax, and especially sales tax. So if you want to go to the next slide, I'll dive into it. They have a cool little infographic of how this works. This is essentially what everyone thinks of when they think of sales tax, just the rates. It's the tip of the iceberg, actually. Can we go to the next slide? And I'll show exactly what that means. So the tip of the iceberg is the tax calculations. The other pieces are just as important, if not even more important. So what those are nexus. You have physical nexus, economic nexus, depending on the different states where you're located, what thresholds you're exceeding. The next big piece of it would be product taxability. So what Avalara has are 3,000 different product taxability codes that line up with the different products and services that are being offered, and we compare those to every state's rules and legislations, how they're taxed in every jurisdiction. which leads to the next thing, jurisdiction assignment. There are over 14,000 different tax jurisdictions in the U.S. alone. And I'll say that again, 14,000 different tax jurisdictions in the U.S. alone. The world typically goes by VAT calculations, and they usually have one tax rate for the entire country. Well, the U.S. is a special child and has, their own special rules. Every state has different rules, and it sometimes even goes down to the local level in a few different states. Which brings to the next point, exemption certificates. So if there are exempt clients, there are some states that have different rules depending on gross sales versus taxable sales. Well, we're including that in our calculations and making sure that we're appropriately using those exemption certs at the right times and making sure that we're not calculating taxes if tax isn't needed. Next, of course, after all the calculations and determinations are done, would then be the actual returns filings and making sure that they're remitted to the right jurisdictions. And then, of course, all this comes together with being audit ready. So anytime that there's a state auditor coming in, you want to make sure you have all your ducks in a row, make sure that the reporting's there, because one of the biggest red flags for auditors nowadays, especially in times like this where states are really struggling, they're going to be looking for sales tax and making sure that everything looks great on your books. So next, please. So this is exactly how AvaTax works. All of this is happening within under a tenth of a second. So right when someone's online, a customer's online in a shopping cart, what's going to happen is they're going to hit that button. We're going to validate that it's the correct address, apply it to the right jurisdiction using all the sourcing rules based off longitude and latitude. A lot of different companies are using zip code-based rates, which are just not accurate anymore given how many different tax jurisdictions there are now. And we're going to apply all those rules and regulations to the products and services that the customer is looking to purchase. We're going to apply and check that if that customer is exempt or not. And at that instant, we can also collect an exemption certificate if they choose that they are an exempt customer. And like I mentioned before, with those 3,000 different product taxability codes, we are identifying if it's taxable or exempt in that jurisdiction that the customer is located. Finally, we are verifying if there's any specialty tax weekends or holidays where we shouldn't be applying rates or any of that sort, sending the correct tax rate back to the invoice at the checkout, and then storing all that information so that we can fill out the returns correctly and make sure that everything gets remitted to the appropriate jurisdictions. Next up, please. And so the big question is, how are you tracking all of this? A lot of it is, businesses are growing, they're expanding their e-commerce presence, and of course, it's impossible to keep track of all the different thresholds for each state, tracking your sales. It's overwhelming. It's a lot to do. So what we have built into the software, this is what I like to call a heat map. It's an economic nexus tracker. So what Avalara is doing on the back end is we're monitoring all of the sales across every single state that you're doing, and country for that matter if you have global presence, and we're comparing them to each state's thresholds. That map typically starts out completely blank. And so as you're doing more and more sales in each state, they're going to start changing colors once you approach a threshold or once you exceed a threshold. So once you get to about 80% of a threshold, that state's going to change from blank to yellow. And that little notice will pop up that's letting you know, hey, if you expect to do more business by the end of the year, you may want to look into getting registered or prepare yourself. Once you exceed 100% of the threshold, that thing's going to turn bright Avalara orange, and you're going to know, hey, I'm either registered there or, wow, I need to start getting registered in all these different states. I have so much orange here now. What do I do? Well, that's where Avalara comes in. We can still monitor all this. We can get you guys registered in these states if need be. And then moving forward, we're going to be monitoring those sales, calculating the tax where it needs to be done, and then remitting to the right jurisdictions. Next slide, please. So, AvaTax, biggest question that everyone has, do you work with my platform, my software? Well, we have over 700 different pre-built integrations, approaching 800 nowadays. And what that means is any different e-commerce platform, ERP, CRM, point of sale system that you're using, we have built or worked with partners to build out these integrations so that we can scale with businesses as they're growing, whether they're startups, starting on a QuickBooks, moving to a Sage or a Sage Intax platform. We're going to be able to scale with them. Next up. So this is just our returns process. Once all the calculations are done and stored in the AvaTax console, all that data is stored securely and transferred over, of course, through the cloud into our returns console, where we have actual compliance agents that are watching and making sure the returns are filled out properly, going through preparing those returns, checking in, and on timely manner, we are filing or remitting to each jurisdiction. And as, of course, everyone can check and see before we're actually remitting everything, we do set some time aside before we actually send anything in. But we do have that 100% accuracy guaranteed. And if there is anything that happens to be late, we're going to back that up and cover it for you guys. Next slide, please. And this just breaks it down a little bit more, the whole sales tax return process, bringing it all together. So, it starts out with all those tax determinations, making sure that the transactions and the sales and purchases that are coming through the e-commerce locations, the shopping carts, the point of sale, the ERP, wherever it's coming through, we're going to be able to pull that data, get the right tax determination, aggregate all the data together, and whether it's in one ERP system, if you have an ERP system, an e-commerce cart, POS, all of those, we're going to be able to aggregate that within the AvaTax console, send that over to the returns console so that we can prepare them properly and on time, file and remit to the respective jurisdictions, and then reconcile and adjust any journal entries if need be. Next slide, please. All right, so the fun stuff. This is our robust solution called Cert Capture. So we do have a mini version of this called Avalara Exemptions built into AvaTax, where if you have, I believe it's under 100 exemption certificates, you can utilize this and store these actual certs online in the cloud, making it easily accessible, especially if there's any auditors coming in. Why didn't you collect tax in these 100 different invoices? Well, here you go, Mr. Auditor. We have our exemption certificate for you that's easily filed. And when we do ask most of our clients or customers, what are you guys currently doing with your exemption certificates? A lot of them tend to say, hey, yeah, we collect those and put them in a filing cabinet. Okay, well, what happens if there happens to be a storm or if, water gets on those papers? Those are done. So we have pretty much an online filing solution and easily accessible, what I like to call filing cabinet, where you can just pull them and present them at any given time. On top of that, if you want to go to the next slide, that actually shows what my next point was going to be. The difference between the robust solution called Cert Capture and Avalara Exemptions, there are different methods and services that you can utilize within Cert Capture where it's very difficult to get in contact with a lot of customers. So what we can do for you is send out bulk email request campaigns, making sure that those customers are seeing us. And what we do is if you do actually have some exemption certificates on file, a lot of them expire in different states. They have different expiration dates. So what we'll do is we'll send out campaigns 30, 60, and 90 days before those are expired and really call on and email constantly to make sure that we're collecting the right data on top of the right exemption cert. On top of that, we are validating all that information. And then, of course, managing all those exemptions for you and getting to put them in the appropriate places and comparing them to every invoice so that we're not charging sales tax when sales tax should not be charged. Next up. So everyone asks, what are the benefits of automating this whole process? Well, one is accuracy. It's very, very difficult to make sure you're getting the right sales tax rates. We have a 100% accuracy guarantee that we're going to make sure that we're getting the correct tax calculations and determinations. Efficiency. This takes so much time if you're doing sales within 5 to 10, even all the states in the U.S., to go into each state's website, logging in, making sure that you're getting the right rates and filing the right return to the right jurisdiction. Takes a lot of time, and having a full team to do it is super overwhelming in-house. Another one is risk management. We guarantee that we're having accurate results, and so that you guys don't have to worry about when auditors come in, you can actually see, we're going to back you guys for that. Customer satisfaction as well, so that your clients aren't wondering hey, why am I getting charged this much in sales tax when the last vendor I worked with charged me this much? So we're going to make sure all that's accurate. The customers are happy. It makes it much more streamlined process for you. Everyone's happy then. And then, of course, business growth. You guys can actually focus on revenue generating events and not have to focus on the awesome sales tax realm. That's where we come in and handle everything for you.